Unlock the power of your mind. This is Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
Welcome and thank you for joining us today. The next hour is devoted to learning something more, not just about the world of shoes and ships and sealing wax, but about how, what, and why we believe as we do. A time for those willing to question what they think they know or what they may believe, those willing to be uncertain for an hour. I'm Eldon Taylor, and this is Provocative Enlightenment. All right, our chat room is open, and my partner Ravinder awaits you there now. You can log on by going to provocativeenlightenment.com/chat. We do have a great chat room, and Ravinder, I know you love sharing it with everyone every week, so please tell us all about it.
It's a good chat room because we have a great group of people and we have some excellent conversation that goes on there, and I like learning from different people and getting different perspectives. Yeah, it's all part of the growth process. So do come join us in the chat room and do some growing yourself. That is provocativeenlightenment.com/chat.
All right, in this week's Spotlight, I wish to discuss the power of perception. We live in a wonderful world, if we choose to see it that way. Let me flesh that out some. I was enjoying myself last evening while contemplating on life and the many experiences it has delivered to me. I reflected on several different occasions where perception defined the experience. Living into ourselves often teaches us that our experiences are as we define them, according to our expectation, which shapes our perception. But let me give you an example. One summer evening not long ago, my youngest son, wife, and I were cruising in our freshly restored 1969 Impala SS convertible, when suddenly there was no power. The car just halted in its tracks, shorted out. I smiled, don't ask me why, and almost immediately there appeared another 1969 Impala convertible. I mean, what are the chances? And for you car buffs, a red 427, but not the SS package. The driver very nicely offered to provide a jump start, and we tried, but to no avail. We thanked him and decided to call a wrecker. However, we were stuck in the middle of the street at a light, not the safest place to break down. Just then, four lovely people, 3 men and a woman, ran to the car from the sidewalk and offered to help push us out of the street. Again, I smiled and thanked them. The tow truck arrived in less than 5 minutes, and the driver, against the rules, very nicely agreed to provide us a ride to my friend's home where the car would be repaired. We had a great conversation and some laughs during the journey, with the four of us in the front of the 4x4 rig, my pretty bride riding on my lap. Then the taxi home. We expected a long wait, but the taxi actually arrived before I finished business with the driver of the tow rig. The ride home was equally pleasant and perhaps even more rewarding. The driver was a Bible teacher who had studied the ancient scripts, and we delighted in a terrific exchange of information and ideas. I have often taught that the world is about perception. Reality is something we define in our minds. Think of the wonderful lesson my son had that evening while we all laughed and made an adventure out of the entire matter. In a different frame of mind, the situation could have easily been nasty. And I have known some of those frames of mind where you look at a situation with grief, with anger, with how come, why, and so forth. Again, the frame of mind, our perception, changes everything. As it turned out, the adventure led to meeting wonderful people and sharing great conversations. And you know, I'd take that again over just driving under the stars, something I really find pleasant, all by its lonesome. Your thoughts on this one, Ravinder?
That was a really interesting evening, as you said. It could have been bad because we could all have been cranky and irritable because you're just stuck there in the middle of traffic. But no, it was like the gods were taking care of us. We were just surrounded by nice people. I mean, what is the chance of, being stranded in your Impala and another Impala pulls up to help us?
Another collector. The only other one in the area that we know about in 2 states. So, I mean, it's like,
Exactly. And there we were, not the worst part of town, but not the best part of town either. And then you're trying to figure out what to do with the car, and these 3 people just run up and help us out. And then, I'm on my phone trying to find a tow truck, and, all of that happened so easily. And that was my first time using Uber as well. I didn't, hadn't used it before, but with a few clicks on my phone and away, I mean, they were there. They were there. It was quick. It was easy. Everyone was nice. We had a laugh, sitting on your lap in front of the tow truck. Yeah, that was kind of tight, but that was fun too. It was fun, and it could easily have been, cranky and irritable and, getting upset with each other. But it wasn't. It was just cool, and that frame of mind changes everything.
See, and you can reframe the story, and so you die right in the middle of an intersection. And you're getting out of the car, and you've got the hood up, and cars are honking at you, and it's a warm night, and, you're getting frustrated, and you can't find the problem, and along comes somebody, and they offer to jump you. Well, that's kind of nice, but the jump doesn't work, and now all that money you've spent, everything you've done, and the car is still stuck there, and you're going to have to push it, and we did have to push it quite a ways to get it out of the street and off the road. And so the minute you changed your frame of mind, you wouldn't begin to see this as such a wonderful experience. These people were all there to help. How long did it take those people to get there? Well, I don't know. But because our perception was, well, let's make it an adventure.
An adventure. That's it, exactly. We made it an adventure, and it was fun.
Everything changed. It's all about perception. Okay, every week I read some of your letters as our way of involving you while paying respect to the very important role you play in making this show successful. Our last show featured Professor Lisa Feldman Barrett, and we discussed her work and book, How Emotions Are Made. Jack wrote, "Great show, but I don't buy the idea that all emotions are made. It seems that we are hardwired for many." Sarah wrote, "Who made that remark that you asked Lisa that led to her dismissal as wholly wrong?" Well, the author is Jay Hosking, and he made the statement in writing a review of her book. You can find his comments and criticisms together with many others online. Not everyone accepts the idea that emotions are a construct of the brain, created by the brain, and none of which are universal, as Barrett argues. Indeed, I found her dismissal of his remarks with the statement that whoever wrote that has not read any journals lately to be somewhat unconvincing and just a little bit, what should I say, a little bit flagrant. Moving on, Richard had this to say about last week's Spotlight and my comments regarding those who would dismiss the possibility of a biological basis underlying consciousness on the grounds of so-called epiphenomena. Ha! You go, Eldon. Epiphenomena, emergent properties, are all over the place in nature. Who knows what's possible? CB added this, "I'll bet programmers can get AI to ignore as errors any epiphenomena. Considering how much resistance there is to consciousness exploration, I'll bet there are those who wish that epiphenomena could be removed from humans." And Gary added this, "I enjoy your Spotlight thoughts every week, and this one really resonated with me. Just wanted to thank you again for sharing and everything you do." Finally, Fawn wrote, "I've been using and recommending your InnerTalk subliminal programs for many years. Your messages have been of great help to me. Thank you for this valuable tool." Well, you're more than welcome, Fawn. Thank you for your feedback. All right, that's all the time that we're going to take for letters today, but I do invite you to opine by emailing me at Eldon, that's ELDON, at eldontaylor.com, or by joining me on Facebook. We sincerely do appreciate your comments, letters, and feedback. Now to this week's show, Island of Genius, the Bountiful Mind. Not long ago, we hosted Jason Pageant, an acquired savant, who, following an attack by two men, experienced a serious blow to the head, and when he awoke in the hospital, he was a mathematical genius who saw the world through the lens of geometry. Think about that for a moment. Where does this genius reside? I mean, is it already somewhere in the brain? Are we hardwired with so much more information about the universe that we just have not been able to tap into, but it's there? I mean, forget, the idea of a tabula rasa, the so-called blank slate. We actually are hardwired with all this information, or does it come from some field of intelligence out there, a kind of or form of collective unconscious that Jung referred to? There are all sorts of savants in the world, mathematicians, musicians, and more. So where is this information that they suddenly tap into? And is it possible for the normal human being, you and I, to tap into it as well? Well, our guest today has studied this unusual state of mind for years, so we'll ask him about this and much more. But first, let me tell you a little about him. Dr. Darold Treffert received his medical degree and psychiatric residency training at the University of Wisconsin Medical School. His first position was setting up a children's unit at Winnebago Mental Health Institute in Winnebago, Wisconsin. He was a clinical professor of psychiatry at the University of Wisconsin Medical School, Department of Psychiatry, for many years. He has written extensively in the professional literature on the rights of the mentally ill, stress management, autism, and savant syndrome. He has written 2 books on savant syndrome, Extraordinary People, Understanding Savant Syndrome, and Islands of Genius, the Bountiful Mind of the Autistic, Acquired, and Sudden Savant. In 2016, Agnesia Healthcare, St. Agnes Hospital, established the Treffert Center to preserve and expand Dr. Treffert's work with savant syndrome and other forms of exceptional brain performance. So on that, let's get him in here. Welcome to Provocative Enlightenment, Dr. Darold A. Treffert.
Well, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. That's all I can say. I'm very glad that you chose to join us today. I love your work. I love your books. And this is an area that I find so fascinating. Then let me ask you this. We like to know 3 things on the show, Professor Treffert. Who is the messenger? What is the message? And, of course, how do we use it? So to begin with, why did you become a doctor, and what in your life inspired you to study autistic, acquired, and sudden savants?
Well, I always wanted to be a doctor from little on. I don't know why, but I had that in my mind, and I never deviated from it, and ended up going to medical school. I think I was inspired a little bit by my dad, my dad was just a machinist in a tool and die company here, and he rose through the ranks, and he was destined to be the next manager of this particular company, or the floor of this particular company. And they called him in and said, "Wally, we'd really like to. You're the perfect person for this position, but you've only got an 8th grade education, and we can't have somebody with an 8th grade education in that spot." And he came home that night and he said, "Darold," he said, "you get that piece of paper, you get that certificate, because that's going to be the key to your future." And so that inspired me to put up with with medical school. But like a lot of things in life, just happen. Like you just described your event last night when the car happened to come by and so forth. And it just so happened that when I finished my residency, I was given the responsibility of starting a children's unit at a mental hospital here in Wisconsin. They had 800 adults, and 25 of those were under 18, and we put them together in a children's unit. And I was amazed at their first of all, some of their impairments. But three of those individuals caught my eye particularly. One little guy had memorized the bus system of the city of Milwaukee, and if you told him the time of day and the bus number, he'd tell you what corner that bus is going by. A second little guy was mute, but you could put a 250-piece jigsaw puzzle in front of him, a picture side down, and he would put it together just from the geometric shapes. And the third little guy was an expert on what happened in this day in history. And every morning I'd come on the unit, Dr. Treffert, do you know what happened in this day in history? I tried to bone up the night before, and that was in the day of the encyclopedia. There was no Google, but I could never match his interest. So I got interested in a situation in which people with severe limitations from autism or other conditions have these islands of genius, and what does that say about the human potential within us all? I wondered then, and I wonder now, and so I began to study savants. I've done that for over 50 years now. I don't know how many hundred savants I have in my registry, but it just seeing these, as I said, the juxtaposition of extraordinary ability with incredible disability just seemed to raise to me the question of human potential.
Yeah. We should probably define some of the terms that we're going to be using today, Professor. So I would ask you to share some of your thoughts as you used them in The Bountiful Mind by way of defining autistic, acquired, and sudden savant conditions.
Right. Autistic savant are, or what I call congenital savants. These are individuals who often have autism, but may have other developmental disabilities, and have this island of genius or savant abilities, and they're evident in childhood, and they usually emerge in the early years of childhood. The acquired savant are individuals, and these are, I've only encountered this within the last 10 or 12 years. All the savants I had seen before that were congenital savants. The acquired savant are ordinary persons who have a head injury or a stroke or dementia, and as the condition proceeds in the case of dementia, or is static in the case of brain injury, a new ability which emerges in which they had no interest before, or had no particular ability before. Jason Padgett is a good example of a gentleman who really didn't take school very seriously, and certainly he didn't see where math had anything to do with anything, and was mugged and had a traumatic brain injury, and after that began to see these complex images which turned out to be fractals. And he had to ask, what's a fractal? I mean, he had no interest in that. And so, an orthopedic surgeon in upstate New York was struck by lightning, had a near-death experience, but survived, and suddenly had an interest in classical music, which was not at all in his interest before. It just was overwhelming interest. Had to listen to classical music. He finally learned to play, and now performs concerts as often as he performs surgery. And that was the new ability. The sudden savant is an even more rare condition in which an individual, an ordinary person, has an epiphany moment. Might be in the middle of the night, or could be in the middle of the day, where suddenly there's a woman that I'm familiar with now who woke up in the middle of the night. She had no interest in drawing or art before, but just woke up and had this overwhelming urge to begin to draw. When she got out of bed and started to draw, and has been drawing ever since, and her drawings are really very remarkable. And there's a gentleman in Israel, Ken, who is an attorney, and he had some musical ability, but it was rather ordinary. And he was at a mall with some friends, and they had a piano there, and he sat down on the piano, and suddenly he understood chords and minors and musical theory within such a brief period of time, and now is performing. So that's the sudden savant.
You know, when you describe the sudden savant, I wonder how many people in history, I mean, we go back a few hundred years to think about this, but how many people awakened to sudden savant to find themselves charged with witchcraft or possession or some other, violation of church doctrine. But let me ask you this, sir.
Well,
I don't think...
Just
go ahead.
Up on that for a moment.
Sure.
One of the things that's happened, one of the values of my book have been to people who are sudden savants, and they're reluctant to tell anybody about it because people are going to say you're crazy, or you're losing your mind, or you're boasting, or whatever. And so they tend to hide it. When they find out I'm not the only one and begin to come forward, it's a real comfort to them.
That I'm sure it is. It is, and I think I don't know. I'll ask you this later in the show about whether it's a blessing or a curse. But to me, it would seem like, well, you can visit me in the middle of the night, whatever it is. I'd love to be a sudden savant. But where I wanted to go is, I think very few people realize that there are states of dementia where savant syndrome manifests. Flesh that out for us. Give us an example, if you will, please.
There's a woman who was in her 80s. She developed a frontotemporal dementia, which is somewhat different than Alzheimer's. It's a dementia, but Alzheimer's is a generalized process. Frontotemporal dementia is a very localized process, usually in the frontal lobe. And as her frontal dementia proceeded, she began to draw and to paint, actually, and striking paintings that have come forth. Of course, the dementia eventually took her life, but in the meantime, her family, or anyone that knew her, and indeed herself, was simply startled by this coming forward. And it's almost, in some people, it's almost as if the dementia sort of unpeels the layers, like an onion. And as one gets farther and further into the core of the individual, one sometimes finds these remarkable abilities. There's another gentleman who's began to compose music, which he had never done before, and as the dementia proceeded. And this is typical, much more common, I should say, in frontotemporal dementia, especially affecting the left anterior temporal area of the brain.
I find that entirely fascinating. Now, I think most people are aware that often autism is accompanied by special abilities, but I have to ask this. Is autism becoming more prevalent, more even epidemic, as so many say, or is that just because we have different measurements today? And do you think, as you read everywhere on the internet, that vaccines have anything to do with the rise in autism?
Right. Well, in terms of there does seem to be an increase in autism. In fact, when I was in my at the Children's Unit in those early years, I did a study of the epidemiology of infantile autism in Wisconsin, and was able to identify only 280 cases in the whole state. Now it's more prevalent, but it is not an epidemic. There is an actual increase, but it's not an epidemic epidemic level, and also there is an increase in childhood abnormalities, congenital defects in general, partly because I think we're able to keep our premature infants alive that we formerly were not, and that often carries a risk of learning disorders or autism. So there is an increase, but it's not at an epidemic level.
All right, when we come back, we've got a break
Sure.
that I have to get out of here for Professor Treffert. But when we come back, I want to know if you see any correlation between the vaccines and autism, like we hear everybody talking about.
Sure.
We're speaking with Professor Darold Treffert about his life, work, and book, Islands of Genius. It is a great read, is a fascinating read, and the potential that is opened up and unveiled in this book you're going to want to read about. You can learn more about our guest and his work by visiting his website at Darold Treffert. That's DaroldTreffert.com. Now we have a video for you in our chat room featuring our guest discussing savant syndrome and the art of prodigious savants. So if you're not in the chat room already, get on over there. You can do that by going to provocativeenlightenment.com/chat. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
A silent battle has been raging for the territory of your mind. Like a virulent virus, the effects are spreading. In Gotcha, Eldon Taylor explores the 24/7 bombardment of information designed to manage your thinking. He demonstrates how new sound bites are championed into personal awareness, becoming memes of the culture. And this results in framing and reframing classical positions, causing adjustments to personal values and history itself. Your every decision process is being managed and manipulated. Gotcha exposes the arrival of the Orwellian age in full-blown technicolor. In laying bare the current uses of the many sophisticated techniques, Eldon reveals what it is we need to do in order to avoid allowing others to puppet our thoughts. For details, go to eldontaylor.com/gotcha.
Unlock the power of your mind. This is Provocative Enlightenment with Eldon Taylor.
Welcome back. If you just joined us, we're chatting with Professor Darold Treffert about his life, work, and book, Islands of Genius. You can learn more about our guest and his work by visiting his website at DaroldTreffert.com. Now we ask our guests for their favorite music that has some true significance to them. Music psychology is a hobby of mine and a field of research with practical relevance in many areas, including intelligence, creativity, personality, and social behavior. Okay, we just played some of Have You Never Been Mellow by Olivia Newton-John. So tell us, Professor, why is this music important to you, and how does it inform us about who you are?
Well, I have listened to patients now for many, many years, and everything we know about health, we've learned from the study of illness. And the same is true in mental health. And so as I listen to the patients all these years, I have heard what they have to say in terms of, how they got into the predicament that they did, and I guess also how the way out. And so I have put together a book. It's called Mellowing, and Lessons from Listening, and it's put together from what I've heard all these years as to what might be a prescription for good mental health. And I like the word, my definition of good mental health is being mellow, and mellow means relaxed, at ease, and pleasantly convivial. If you look it up in the dictionary, it also says without the rashness of youth, having attained gentleness, softness, and kindliness through aging and experience, relaxed and at ease and pleasantly convivial. And so the song "Have You Never Been Mellow" talks about finding a comfort from inside you, and sometimes letting somebody else be strong. So that song is a recipe in very short form for becoming more mellow.
What a wonderful expression. All right, before the break, sir, I suggested to you that many people blame vaccines for the increase in autism. Is there any real connection, or is this, the underground world of conspiracies?
Well, I think originally, if we go back 8 or 10 years, at that time the vaccines contained thimerosal, which is mercurochrome, as a preservative. And the thinking was that it was that mercury, which was in the vaccines, which was causing autism. Mm-hmm. And there was quite a scare about that. And I think that, first of all, thimerosal is no longer in vaccines. So I think the connection between vaccines and thimerosal is not a valid one, and that's not even pertinent now because there are. But the question, I think, is become whether the frequency with which one gives vaccines now to, I forgot what the number is by the time the child was 18 months, but it's a huge number, that in some children it may be overwhelming the immune system, and that may be the link, if there is one, between autism and vaccines. But I think the original scare with thimerosal and the number that people were concerned about, I think that's been pretty well. I think what you'll find with pediatricians now is that they are encouraging parents to vaccinate their children, but they have narrowed this, or they've made the schedule less drastic, and to the extent that there is a connection, there may be some immunologic relationship.
In your work, would you say that the growth of autism would be a constant rate with or without vaccines? I mean, obviously maybe in this instance or that instance because of the variability of human physiology and the immune system, etc., it could contribute. But would we see essentially the same growth in autism? And if so, what do you think is the underlying reason for that?
Well, I think the underlying reason there are genetic components to autism, but you don't see that genetic rise in a short period of time as we've seen in the last 30 or 40 years. So there's some other environmental effects at work. And I think that those environmental effects, it may be PVCs, it may be some other contaminants that are being ingested either by women during the pregnancy, prenatal, or by children. And I think we need to find out what those environmental factors are. The other thing, as I mentioned earlier, that the incidence of congenital abnormalities overall is rising, not just autism. And I think we need to look for environmental factors, and there, the searches on whether those are in the water, whether those are in the soil, whether those are in the air. My own feeling is that it may boil down to some of the plastics and their alternate and their derivatives.
Interesting. All right, sir. You heard your setup, your introduction. I have to ask you, where do you think these savant abilities come from? I mean, Are we all equipped somewhere, somehow, an organ brain with information that's just not tapped into? Or is the information, is it something we're sourcing from outside, like a collective unconscious? I mean, what is your theory about where all this ability resides?
Right. Well, when I was in psychiatric training, when we talked about collective unconscious, I was less than enthused. That sounded pretty soft science to me. And I'm pretty traditional scientist. But one of the things that I've noted in savants, whether they're congenital savants or acquired savants or sudden savants, is that these people know things they never learned. And the pressing question for me, there's no question in my mind, but that, for example, some children who have never been exposed to it will end up reciting the periodic table or have a mass of information about geography and never having studied the globe. And the question is, where does that come from? And the main question is, well, okay, where does that come from? From my standpoint, it is it's a genetic transfer of knowledge. We're quite content with that genetics has something to do with how tall we are, the color of our eyes, or the color of our hairs.
Sure.
But my feeling is that the savant abilities, sometimes at prodigious levels, are a genetic phenomenon, but it's the genetic transmission of knowledge. Now that incites all sorts of furious arguments about nature and nurture, because I'm talking about nature as opposed to nurture. The savant doesn't learn. The savant can learn and expand on the abilities, but the basic abilities are there. How did they get there? They get there through this genetic transfer of knowledge. And I think in the past, many people have thought we sort of start with a blank disc. We're born, and we become what we experience or what we learn determines who we are. And I'm saying, and not just myself, but others, is that the brain comes loaded, factory installed software of all sorts, in varying degrees. We're not all little Mozarts or Michelangelos, but we start with this infusion of software. The question is, well, okay, why if that's there, why don't we use it? Well, we don't use it because it would crash, just like the computer. If you clicked all the keys at once, it would crash. And I think it's there as a reserve function. And
go ahead. I'm sorry.
And to me, it is there by the, as I said, the genetic transfer of knowledge. However, I'm not entirely closed to the possibility that there is some link to a universal knowledge. It seems like savants, especially autistic savants, many times know so many things they haven't learned, and it is it's almost as if they tapped into a universal knowledge. You can call it collective unconscious or whatever, and I don't know, and I guess I'm in search, trying to see if come to some conclusion about that.
Yeah, the universe is, after all, a field of information. It's all information. But
yes,
I remember years ago reading Dawkins, Richard Dawkins' Selfish Genes, Selfish Means. I'm sure you're familiar with that. What you're really suggesting, if I've got this right, is that the memories, the learning of our prior generations passed genetically, just as our eye color does. And so somewhere in that brain program, much of this information may well reside. Did
correct.
I get that correct?
Yes. Yeah. And for example, with some of the savants, as we've been able to trace back their family history, you'll find that it may not just be the parents, but it may be a cousin, or it may be an aunt or an uncle, and somebody will remember. I remember that somebody talked about Uncle Harry was once a professor somewhere or other, and so it's handed down, not necessarily directly from a parent to child, but the extended family, and this knowledge. And yes, that's, as you described it, that's where I am in my thinking about it.
Has anyone, Professor, looked at the genealogy of the savants to determine? I mean, if this is genetic, is the savant propensity, is that also genetic?
Well, there has been a couple of studies that have looked for the savant gene, and one study indicated that they had found one area on chromosome whatever, which tend to be present in the savants. Other people trying to replicate that study were not able to do that. But I think I think as we become more sophisticated with our genetic tools and techniques, I think we'll be able to trace families. My feeling is that the how people know things they never learned is a genetic phenomenon. But I sometimes wonder. I'm working presently with several savants who have telepathic abilities. And that's not something I would have originally. When I met these individuals, I was very skeptical of that. But it turns out that what's happened is that a number of savants are mute. They simply don't talk. And now with the talking tablet, where they can press out the numbers on the tablet, it gives them a voice. And some of these savants are really writing erudite poems or theses. It's mind-boggling when it comes from that individual. But and so these several patients who have telepathy abilities, for example, I'll give this patient a card. She can read her therapist's mind. It's only works between she and her therapist. I'll give the therapist the word, a card, synesthesia, or egosyntonic, or some word that she probably hasn't heard, and certainly the patient hasn't heard.
Right.
And the patient just dutifully types out synesthesia, a letter at a time. And so that's taken me, this whole journey has taken me into areas I ordinarily would not have even ventured into.
And that kind of challenges the empirical models that, as scientists, we deal with. I mean, telepathy would argue that, brain maybe is not responsible for mind. Mind stuff is something other than the artifact of organ brain, an emergent property. I don't know. Where do you go with that?
Well, I think when Wilder Penfield, who was a neurologist of some repute years ago, and probably the world's finest neurologist,
right?
When he came to the end of his life, he had to answer the question: Is the mind bigger than the brain? And he came to the conclusion that it is. That the brain, marvelous as it is, and indeed it is. It's simply astounding. But probably the mind is bigger than the brain. So those are all questions I'm sort of struggling with after
That's what living is all about, though. What a great mystery it is, huh?
Yeah, and I guess one other question that faces me, I think, or faces in trying to understand the brain, and is that I think the brain can probably understand the liver and the heart, and ultimately the kidneys can sort of lead us to an understanding of those organs. The question is, can the brain transcend itself to understand itself, or is there an innate barrier between the brain transcending and understanding itself? And I think there probably is, but that the brain is surrounded in this really the bony skull. It's well protected, and it's so well protected that we can't scope it like other organs, and we can't conveniently biopsy it like other organs. And so it's sort of the last secret frontier, and that's what makes this time so challenging in neuroscience.
And a lot of the new technology, I think, fMRI, et cetera, is giving us many insights that are promising at the very least. But I agree with you; it is the ultimate frontier. Yeah. How common is savant syndrome, Professor?
Well, about 1 out of 10 persons with autism has savant ability. Some people say it's more than that, but my experience is still with autistic kids about 1 out of 10. So, to the extent there are autistic individuals out there, about 1 out of 10 have savant abilities, although it does occur in other conditions as well, including dementia, as I said, and traumatic brain injury. But I'm convinced that there is a little Rain Man within each of us, and the challenge is how can we tap that without having a head injury or a stroke or a central nervous system incident? And that's where a lot of my work is sort of concentrating on at the present time. I think can we make ourselves smarter? I think we can. Sometimes in the future, some of it will be electronic. We know, for example, that we can put part of the brain to sleep with electrodes, and some abilities emerge in ordinary people. Pharmacologically, we know that the amphetamines can increase short-term memory, but we know that there are problems with that. And cognitive approaches, learning how to draw, teaching executives how to draw better, not because you want to make them artists, but you want them to be more creative or tap into that, seeing the bigger vision. And then finally, meditation and and hypnosis, other approaches to consciousness. I think my view is that we all have these repository of skills. The question is how to tap those. And I think we years ago one didn't hear about heart pacemakers, but I think we'll end up having brain pacemakers already we do for Parkinson's disease and others, but there's so many ramifications. And the biggest message I think I've had out of this whole thing is the brain potential. There's a condition called the Nandy-Walker syndrome, in which a gentleman developed a twitch in his right leg. He went to the doctor, and it didn't go away, so they snapped a picture. And he has 10% of cortical function. The other 90% is cerebral spinal fluid, which is supposed to be cortex. Right. He's married. He has a job. He has a normal IQ. And so some people say we use less than 10% of our brain capacity. I think that's probably true.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Professor. I'd love to have you back to the show, but we are just out of time. The book is Islands of Genius, The Bountiful Mind of the Autistic, Acquired, and Sudden Savant, by Professor Darold A. Treffert, Treffert. And I tell you, you're going to want to read this show. I want to thank you, Professor, for your willingness to share your work with us today and for the body of work you have contributed that advances our understanding. Well, we've come to the end of another episode of Provocative Enlightenment. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed our show and will join us again next week, same time and same place. And do tell your friends. Until then, remember, wherever you are in the world, believing in yourself always matters.
Provocative Enlightenment has been brought to you by Progressive Awareness Research and other sponsors. Provocative Enlightenment is a syndicated show and appears on other networks. For a schedule of show times, visit provocativeenlightenment.com. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, write to Eldon at eldontaylor.com.